The next thing I'd like to do is continue with this discussion of real-world handling of the run value right here like that. So we can see we have this blueprint here. So what I'm doing is I create a URL and then I attempt to call that URL right here. So this code here that I have highlighted is standard Scala code. And an important thing to know about this code is that it can throw an exception. So that's why I have it wrapped with attempt right here. So I attempt to run that and then I handle the exception. And if you recall, when you call attempt, it will return a throwable here by default if an error does occur. And then another thing I want to do is I don't like calling URLs without having a timeout value. So I add the timeout to the attempt. So that's a really nice feature with ZIO is you can always add a timeout to a ZIO effect like that and say, I'm going to give you 2 seconds to run, and if you don't finish before then, I am going to fail. So that's the way the blueprint works right there, and you can see it has no environment requirements. The throwable comes from the attempt, and then if things work, we're going to return an option of string. And then if you come down here and you look at the run value, I'm doing what I did in the last video. So I have the blueprint, and then I'm saying I want to handle both the failure and success cases right here. So let's see how that works. And I just made that change. I'll save that. And if you saw it flicker there real quick, you'll see that this was the success data we got back from the URL. So that worked just fine. The other thing I want to show you now is what happens in different cases. So one thing is, what if we have a malformed URL? I'll put a blank space right there and then save that. And we see, oh, okay, now here I got the failure case. I didn't note that earlier, but in the success case, we did come down here to the success line. And the text from the URL was printed there. So that was the success case. Here, with a malformed URL, I come down to the failure line, which is what I want. And then I get this error message right here about an illegal character in the past. So it's a URI syntax exception right there. So now let's fix that one and try another possible problem. Let's say that the web service doesn't respond in time. So now I'm only giving it 2 milliseconds. So I'll save that. And then we'll come down here and we expect to see a failure right here, right? We should see failure, but no, we do not. What we get is a success of none right there. And this is the reason for this video, is I think when I'm working with a timeout, I would like that to come to the failure case right here, but it doesn't. The way this works right here is instead of getting a exception right here, we're just getting a none value in this option position right here. And therefore, the run value here thinks, well, we have a success, so I'm going to print that. But in fact, an error occurred. So there are ways to handle this success case down here. And I show that in a couple of places here. I know this is all commented out. One way you could do this is say, in the failure case, I'll do what I did earlier. Something similar to that. And then the success case I handle here, and I split that into a sum and a none. So this is one possible way of handling the success case is with this type of anonymous function right here. However, I don't like that because I'm still getting a none. So the root cause for me is I don't want to have a none here. I want to have a throwable when we get a timeout. So we have to get a throwable. That's what we need to do. And a way to do this in ZIO is we change timeout to timeout fail. And now what we could do here is say, I want to have a timeout exception. And we could have any kind of exception here, but this is actually, bear with me just a moment. There's actually this thing called a Java util concurrent timeout exception. So that's what I want to use right here. And we'll just say, well, the request timed out. So you can see here how timeout fail works. It has these two parameter groups. So the first parameter group is the exception that you want to throw. So again, I'm throwing a timeout exception. The second parameter group comes from here over to here. And this is that timeout value that I want to get. So this could normally be in seconds, but I'm using milliseconds here just to make sure that I do generate that error. So now when we do that, you might think that we're okay, that now this is going to throw a throwable and everything else looks okay. So if you think that, that's fine. That's what I thought at first as well, but let me save that. And now Now we could see the problem is that if I had waited long enough for the compiler to catch up, what's actually going on is I'm saying that I want an option of string, but when you use timeout fail, you're actually getting a nicer thing that you can work with, which is just a plain string right here. So now that's not returning an option anymore. The option was coming from that timeout. And now a benefit of timeout fail here is that it's giving me a simpler type to work with right there. So now everything's working the way I want. In this case, I get the timeout, and that yields a throwable. That comes to the failure case right here, and I get that concurrent timeout exception right there. In this case right here, let me go back to giving us a couple of seconds over here. And now this should fail right there. And indeed, we get the URI syntax exception as a failure, which is exactly what I want. And now if everything is good, so now the URL is good, and we should have enough time to get that. Press save again. And now the success case right here is the text that we're getting back from this URL when I call it. So in this case, the simple change from a timeout here to timeout fail gives me what I want, and it's actually a better solution all around. It puts all of my errors up here in the error channel, and then it gives me my result. When we do have success, it gives me my result as a string. And then in both cases, I can handle that result down here in fold ZIO. But the thing I like about the new solution here is that all the failures come out right here on that failure line right here. And the only time this code is run is when I get that string back here. And again, right now we're just working in this area where we have real world code up here as step one, and then in the end of the world when our application is finished running. This code that I have highlighted here, this fold ZIO, shows how we can handle both the failure and the success case as desired. And I was going to say that's the end of the video, but I want to talk about this for just a few more moments. So I just want to note that this is something that can happen, especially if you're working with a type like option, where the none can slip in over here, and you're like, well, I really don't want that to be a none like we had in the previous example. So then you have to figure out, well, how do I want to change this code so I can get that none error onto this error channel here? And that's what I did in this example of switching from timeout to timeout fail. And my point being, if you run into that case when you're working with ZIO code where you're getting a none over here and you really want an error over here on the error channel, then just look around in the ZIO code or think about your problem and try to figure out how to take that none and convert it into an error that will be on the error channel over here. So that's a little bit of a bonus point in this video, but I did want to make sure I talked about that.